Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Wolin, I want to go back to something Mr. Schulman said. He testified earlier that he inherited the practice of deferring to the IG for audits and investigations when problematic issues arise at the IRS. Mr. Wolin, did Mr. Schulman have the authority to change the management practices he inherited at the IRS? Yes or no?
Sure.
In this circumstance, do you think he should have changed the practice of deferring to the IG and looked into the targeting on his own?
Oh, if the question is, well, Congresswoman, I think that once an IG begins work, it's very important to stay clear of it. If a political appointee, for example, involves themselves in the work of an IG or in topics that the IG is looking at, I think they run the very big risk that's understandable that that will be seen as interference. And that is why, for many administrations, for the longest time that I can recall, it has been a core principle of ours that when an IG begins their work, we stay clear.
What kind of activity do you think it would take to change the practice of deferring to the IG for audits and investigations?
Well, I'm not sure I understand your hypothetical, Congressman. I would say this, that here, of course, by the time, for example, I learned of the fact that the IG was conducting an audit, the offending conduct we now learn was no longer taking place. I would expect that if the IG were looking at something and he determined that there was something that was ongoing that needed quick action, that he would raise that and that we would have a conversation so as specifically not to be either interfering with an IG's work or being seen to be interfering with an IG.
Would the gentlelady yield for just 1 minute?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
I think it's important, Mr. Wolin. You keep saying, and Mr. Schulman kept saying, that by the time you learned about it, the offending activity had finished. The offending activity is two parts. It's the abusive behavior of questions, inappropriate questions, questions that are probative that in fact make us doubt whether or not that information leaked. Let's leave that aside. I think the IG has determined a cutoff date. But are you here today to tell us that no entity has been denied approval or denial in a timely fashion? Because I believe Mr. George will testify that as far as he knows, people are still in limbo today.
No,
on your watch.
Not at all, Mr. Chairman. I think you're exactly right. The IG has made that clear. Now that we know that, we learned that last week, this needs to be fixed quickly, absolutely, and that's part of the charge that Mr. Werfel has. Absolutely.
Okay. But he's not, but he is the acting director at this time.
He's the acting commissioner as of this morning.
Commissioner as of this morning. So we would expect that in spite of these draconian budget cuts, that these 100 or more potential entities will in fact get a prompt and accurate adjudication, meaning days now that it's been years.
Well, I can't, I don't want to speak for Mr. Werfel in setting a precise timeline, Mr. Chairman, but
you're his boss. You speak from the President to the Secretary to yourself to him. What the heck appropriate timeline should we expect when you've been drowning these people for 3 years or more in some cases? What is the timeline today? If you're not accountable today, then you're not ever accountable. Could you give us a timeline? In your opinion, what would be the maximum time somebody should have to wait when they've waited for years?
Well, as I've said, Mr. Chairman, what we've charged Mr. Werfel with is coming back within 30 days and to fully and promptly implement the various recommendations in the IG's report, of which this is one.
Mr. George, and I'm taking a lot of the gentlelady's time, but 3 years you wait? If you're sitting in that pile after 3 years, is 30 days to find out what the plan is to have you come out of that pile when, in fact, other entities that were submitted 2 years after you, also involved in this, quote, category, have been approved? Is 30 days, in your estimation, before a plan is submitted, is a new acting commissioner the reason? First of all, none of these commissioners knew anything, apparently, or asked anything. So why is a new one important? If you could answer, and I apologize to the gentlelady, give her back her time.
Yeah, if I will allow, Mr. Chairman, I believe I've made a commitment to work with Mr. Werfel, and he realizes the high priority the President and that my organization, have placed as Secretary of the Treasury on this issue. I can't give you a definitive timeline, a date, but I will commit to you that we will work to expedite these and help him, rather, expedite these applications, sir.
I thank you. And the gentlelady will be given 2 additional minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. In reclaiming my time, I want to take issue with one thing that our esteemed ranking member of our committee said earlier. He said that the trust in the IRS has been undermined. And the issue I would take with that is that trust has not been eroded or undermined, that it's been destroyed. That trust is gone. My constituents, the people I represent, believe the Federal Government is out to get them. And when things like Watergate were going on, you had a battle of titans. You had the politically powerful going after the politically powerful. But in this matter, you have the politically empowered going after the people who hired them and people who don't have the weapons of the imprimatur of the Federal Government to turn to. You have people who are relying on trust, and that trust is absolutely gone. I have no idea how we can restore the trust that has been destroyed as a result of this. The IRS has let down the very people that they were employed to serve. In fact, the people think the IRS has turned against them. And it is on a stack of other concerns where they believe the Federal Government has turned against them. This is Goliath against David. These are the people who hired Goliath and empowered Goliath. And Goliath has turned against those very people. It's moms and dads at kitchen tables who are taking kids to soccer games who want to have a political organization like a Tea Party. It's people who believe they're patriots, and their own government is telling them, we will not allow you to exercise your patriotism in this way because we don't like your brand of patriotism. This is far worse than anything we've seen in Watergate or that the government has done to the government, because this is the government turned against the very people who hired them, who trusted them, and who have destroyed that trust. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.